Boy Zelda, or excuse me, this guy, the character, the sheep among us referred to as Link, will be playable in some capacity in the upcoming release of The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. And I started to wonder, how will he be playable? I have a few predictions and one pie in the sky dream, so stick with me for a little bit. There's boring answer A. The game opens up Metroid style with the character starting the game as a fully powered up Boy Zelda. You do a forced lost boss encounter of some kind, this tragic defeat springs Girl Zelda into action, and we dive into the rest of the game. Then there's boring answer B. We play through the game as Girl Zelda from the jump, like we've been told by the marketing up until this point, but unlock the option to play as Boy Zelda once he's saved for some sort of new game plus mode or something. Or finally, boring answer C, a combination of both of these things. But something that would be infinitely more interesting, and as an added bonus, would complete the trifecta of conventions that Aonuma talked about breaking in his pitch for Breath of the Wild way back when it was simply known as Zelda Wii U. Boy Zelda will at some point facilitate co-op play. I mean, think about it. It's been a recent trend for games to include features like this, even in the post-launch period during DLC. Captain Toad did it, Ghost of Tsushima did it, Code of the Lamb did it, just to name a few disparate case studies. I don't see why Echoes of Wisdom couldn't join this party. I'm sure the ability to play through Zelda games with a friend would move quite a few units. I know the ability to play with friends makes me infinitely more likely to buy a game, really regardless of how much or how little it would have interested me without that feature. I have a hard time believing that isn't true for a lot more people as well. On this line of thinking, with Echoes of Wisdom being less than a month away at this point, I figured this is as good a time as any to talk about everything I hope to see from the game that we haven't seen so far, like Boy Zelda, as well as what I'm excited to see more of when the game is available to play. That way, when the game is out and I make a video about my thoughts on the finished project that you should get subscribed to see, I can use this video that you should click the like button on as basis for how the game measured up to my expectations. This is definitely something that I've received the ire of traditional Zelda fans for, but the most exciting aspect of Echoes of Wisdom to me is its potential for emergent gameplay. The lock and key design philosophy of Zelda's past is the weakest aspect of those games for several reasons, with the most prominent being it's not actually more challenging to find the one intended way to solve a puzzle than it is to find your own unique creative solution with puzzles that allow that. At the end of the day, even games with emergent gameplay in mind have an intended solution. So people that feel more accomplished by solving a math problem than they do an open-ended prompt get to have what they want either way. More importantly than that, the cliche of needing to talk to a specific NPC or go to a specific place before being able to achieve a given objective as a formality adds nothing to the franchise but tedium. Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know in Breath of the Wild, the giant blue furnace looking thing with an empty opening for a flame front and center probably needs to be lit with the strange blue flame from right outside of town. And it makes sense that the game tells you the flame needs to be lit because, sure, it is a game ultimately intended for children. Even still, it makes more sense that this information is ultimately opt-in rather than being a prerequisite to completing the task, like is so commonly the case in traditional Zelda games. If you can connect these dots on your own, the game shouldn't stop you from doing so by requiring the player to be told by the game what they already knew. Also, completely removed from game design and what is and isn't fun, emergent gameplay is objectively better for the word of mouth for a game. Anyone that was on the internet for the release of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom can tell you that these games dominated discussions online largely due to the creative solutions people playing the game could come up with. And sharing these unique solutions was generally encouraged because where some may see the answer to a lock and key style puzzle to be a spoiler, I think it's difficult to see an open-ended solution as nothing less than inspiration to solve it on your own differently. Just based on what we've seen so far, I could see a world where people are sharing the unique ways they use echoes to clear given challenges or different ways of approaching combat. I would love to see there be more ways Echoes of Wisdom makes this possible. All of that said, prior to Breath of the Wild, my favorite Zelda games were the top-down games. I always felt like they did a much better job at being less egregious about the problems I have with the series, like the lock and key situation being a lot less obtuse generally from a top-down perspective. But now, with the innovations found in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, 3D games have passed them by in a big way. I want to see how modern 2D Zelda can use what's unique to its format to further push the sub-series forward in the same way. A lot of what this game seems to be doing to make it stand out from the field is implementing elements from modern 3D games, but I think what could make Echoes of Wisdom a generational experience in its own right is for it to turn the top-down Zelda experience on its head in some way we don't expect. So far, it seems the way they're choosing to do that is with narrative elements. Like, this game will obviously play differently than any other 2D Zelda game before it, since no other game has allowed the player to play as Zelda. Or it will be different for things like both Zora tribes being simultaneously represented in the game, or there just generally being more villages in the game than what is typical. But will there be any new gameplay elements that exist as gameplay for gameplay's sake that aren't analogs to the Breath of the Wild formula? So far, it seems like the answer is no. Right now, Echoes of Wisdom is giving Tears of the Kingdom, but Zelda in 2D. Not by revolutionizing what makes 2D Zelda games fundamentally unique. And that's not necessarily damning or even a little negative, but I think to be truly blown away, I'd need to see something like that in this game. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be something that's super complex either. Climbing is such a simple concept in a vacuum, but its implementation in Breath of the Wild specifically was revolutionary. Ultra Hand was a similar situation, granted that is a much more complicated concept. The point is, anywhere in between those two innovations could elevate 2D Zelda in the modern day. On that topic, a way to get to this point would be unique items and abilities. In the process of writing the script for this video, Nintendo dropped the Still World trailer. With that trailer came, obviously, the Still World itself being shown off a bit, an explanation of how dungeons are going to work, the reveal of Sword Fighter form, and the introduction of new support characters like Dampa. I'm currently not all that interested in the Still World or dungeons in particular, as they seem pretty standard Zelda affair. I could be wrong, and maybe there's more to them that make them anything more than just ties to the traditional approach. But for now, my questions and curiosity is for the latter two reveals. Will there be any similar additions we have yet to see? We do know, at least for characters, there will be, because in the trailer, Nintendo alludes to there being more supporting characters to meet in Hyrule. What else could these characters do? Some are pretty straightforward, I think, like we get a glimpse of a Great Fairy, and those have a long history in the franchise, so what they will contribute isn't as interesting to me. But what about the Gerudo we see? Will they also be some sort of souped up Echo stand-in like Dampa? Or the Gordon? He mentioned fireworks, but what do they do? An attack we can use, I'd guess? Or what about the old man that gives me Orca from Wind Waker vibes? Is he how we unlock and/or level up Sword Fighter form? All of that is to say, I'm curious to know if the supporting character role will be in support of the creative aspects of the game, or if they're intended to be comfort food for the fans of traditional Zelda, i.e. paying rupees for them to do some sort of service instead of using Tri's ability to find creative solutions, for example. Speaking of Tri, will they get any additional abilities? We know about the Echoes and all of the Bond stuff, which I'm sure will introduce all sorts of possibilities, but if Tears of the Kingdom is of any indication, I wouldn't be shocked to see Nintendo have even more abilities they're not telling us about. Some, if not all of which, could potentially be even cooler, judging by the Tears of the Kingdom example and what happened with that game. As far as the Sword Fighter form itself, I'm of two minds. Its reveal could be the answer to how Boy Zelda will work in the game, given the fact that for Girl Zelda, it's temporary. There's a level gauge, so I'd assume the time afforded in Sword Fighter form as Girl Zelda can be increased, but my assumption is the only way to remove the limitations entirely on the form would be to unlock Boy Zelda. I'll also add, this reveal leaves me with hope for a path to co-op as well. Speaking of which, this is my wildest hope for Echoes of Wisdom. And I know, this is crazy to want before the game is even out, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope for DLC for this game. Sue me. In the past decade or so, Nintendo has illustrated that DLC is a great, relatively low impact way for them to present new ideas for an existing framework that don't quite justify an entire new game. And as someone that loves to have reasons to play games I love for as long as the content of the game will naturally allow, I'm a big believer in Nintendo's approach to DLC. Obviously, with Echoes of Wisdom not being out yet, I can't say exactly what I would want that DLC to be. Maybe that's a video for later. I can confidently say that I want it, you know, if the game ends up being as good as it looks, of course. It can be something relatively tame like free DLC with a hero mode, all the way to full-on expansion levels akin to Breath of the Wild with a Master Sword trial equivalent, the aforementioned co-op DLC, assuming it's not already in the game, additional story content. Any and all of that and or more would be a day one purchase for me. Thank you to Redirect's first ever executive producer, Trev L. Steinberg, and all of these other great names you see scrolling on the screen for keeping this channel afloat. To see your name in the credits like them, as well as get your hands on Nintendo-inspired merch, Twitch subs, early access to videos like this, head on over to shop.watchredirect.com. And most importantly, you watch this video all the way through, you must be excited for The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. To see all of the other videos I have planned for this game, click or tap subscribe and the notification bell to know when they're up.